You ever notice how some things sit right in front of you for years, and somehow, you still don't really see them? Tonight, I was wiping down this old kitchen table, the same one your granddad built back in 1963, and there it was. His keyring, the one he carried every single day of our marriage, and for the first time in all these years, I saw it clearly. One little brass key, smaller than the rest, worn smooth from years of use, but I had never seen it before. The rain outside kept falling steady all night, tapping on the window like it was trying to remind me of something I'd forgotten. So I set down my tea, took that key in my hand, and for a moment, my heart started to race like it used to when he came home late and I didn't know why. And when I turned that little brass key, I found a truth that changed every story I had ever told about your grandfather. Now, before I tell you what that key unlocked, my dear, and for everyone listening tonight, let me say welcome. You've found your way to Grandma Cozy Stories, where every evening we share a piece of life, love, and the quiet truths that time leaves behind, that we post new stories every single day, stories that warm the heart, stir the memory, and sometimes break it a little before it mends again. So if you're here for tales of family, forgiveness, and those moments that make you pause and whisper, "I remember something like that," then you're in the right place. Go on and subscribe. Pour yourself a little tea and settle in beside me, because what I'm about to tell you starts small, like a key, but ends with a door no one thought existed. Every night ends the same way for me. The house quiets itself after supper, and I move through each room like a clock winding down. I wipe the counters. I fold the same dish towel over the oven handle. I rinse my teacup and fill it again. One sugar cube, just like he used to. Some habits don't fade. They linger, polite and stubborn. Even after all these years, I still set his mug out. It's silly, I suppose, but I can't bring myself to break the ritual. The mug stays on the right side of the table, handle turned toward where he used to sit. Sometimes I catch myself talking to that empty chair, just to fill the air. The old refrigerator hums like a memory. The clock above the window ticks steady. Every sound reminds me that time keeps going, even when love stands still. Tonight, while wiping down the counter, I picked up his old key ring. It's heavy with years. His house key, his shop key, the one for the truck that hasn't moved since the day we buried him. I've polished that key ring every month. Same rag, same oil, never really thinking about it. But tonight, something caught the light. A small, brass key tucked behind the others, dull but different. My fingers stopped moving, the kind of stillness that sneaks up on you, like a shiver without cold. I turned it between my fingers, trying to remember if I'd ever seen it before. I hadn't. I would have remembered. It's funny how something so small can suddenly feel so heavy. I ran my thumb along its edge. The metal was smooth, as if it had been used often, and yet, it looked nothing like the others. A part of me wanted to put it back, leave it buried in the ring, untouched, like the rest of his secrets I'd chosen not to ask about. But something deeper, older, told me not to. I took a breath, steadying my hand. My tea had gone cold, and the clock had ticked past midnight, and still, I couldn't put that key down. When I finally turned it over, the lamp caught the engraving on the side, a number, just 3 characters, .47B, and I knew exactly what that meant. I was 19 when I met your grandfather. The world was different, then smaller, slower, quieter. Gas was cheap, skirts were long, and folks said good morning whether they knew you or not. I was working at a little diner off Main Street, serving pie and coffee to anyone who could spare a quarter. He came in one summer evening, hands covered in grease, a tired smile on his face. He ordered black coffee and apple pie, no ice cream, said it made his teeth cold. I laughed, and something in me decided to remember that laugh. He wasn't handsome, in the movie star kind of way, but he had that look, the kind of steady eyes that made you feel safe. When he spoke, he listened with his whole face. I didn't know it then, but I was already in love. We spent our evenings by the jukebox, him slipping in dimes for songs I didn't even know the words to yet. Sometimes we'd drive to the lake and just sit there, watching the headlights of cars fade down the road like tiny shooting stars. My mother used to say, "Good men carry their keys with purpose." I thought she meant they opened doors for others, kept promises, stayed steady. I never dreamed she meant that sometimes a key could hold a story they never wanted told. We were married in the fall, small ceremony, a borrowed dress, his hands trembling when he slipped that ring on my finger. He jingled his keys in his pocket when he was nervous, and I remember thinking it was the sweetest sound in the world. But that night, I didn't notice the extra key already dangling from his ring. We built a quiet life, a modest home with peeling paint and a porch that creaked when the wind pushed it. One car between us, a garden out back that never quite grew straight. He'd head off early to the garage, come home late smelling of oil and dust. I'd stay up waiting, a book in my lap and the porch light burning like a promise. He was good to me, gentle, steady, but distant in a way I couldn't name. He'd hold me close, yet his eyes were always somewhere else, like he was thinking about something that didn't belong to our little life. Some nights I asked where he'd been so late. He'd smile, kiss my forehead, and say, "Just work, sweetheart, nothing worth worrying about." And I wanted to believe him. I did believe him, because marriage, I thought, was trust, even when it aches. We didn't have much, but we had enough. Enough to laugh, enough to keep the lights on, enough to dream about the future. Still, there were moments, tiny cracks I tried not to see. A letter he hid in his toolbox, the way he'd flinch when someone mentioned the old factory on the other side of town. I told myself love was about faith, not questions. Until one day he came home with a box he said never to open. The house felt too quiet after the funeral. People had come and gone for days, carrying casseroles and condolences. Then, silence. Just me, the ticking clock, and the faint smell of flowers wilting on the counter. I moved through the rooms like a shadow, picking up his things, folding his shirts, pretending I was cleaning when really, I was trying to make sense of the empty space he'd left behind. That's when I found it. The keyring. It was sitting right where he always left it, on the little hook by the door. I stared at it for a long time before reaching out. It felt wrong, holding something that had always been his. The brass key caught the light again, the same one I'd seen that rainy night months before. I tried every lock in the house, the shed, the desk drawer, the basement door. None of them fit. That key didn't belong anywhere in this home we'd built together. And that's when I remembered the box. The one he brought home years ago, the one he told me never to open. It had been tucked away somewhere, maybe in the attic, maybe behind the old quilts I never use. I hadn't thought about it in years. But now the thought of it wouldn't let me rest. I made myself a cup of tea, sat by the table, and told the empty chair across from me, "All right, old man, if you're going to keep secrets, I guess I'm going to have to find them." The stairs creaked under my feet as I climbed to the attic. Dust floated through the beam of my flashlight, and the smell of cedar filled the air. There it was, that same old wooden box, cornered under a tarp, untouched since the day he'd brought it home. My heart started to pound in my chest. I wiped away the dust, pressed my fingers against the latch, and when I cracked that old box open, the smell of engine oil and old paper hit me, and there was more than just a secret inside. Inside the box were stacks of old pay stubs, faded receipts, and a small bundle of letters tied with a red ribbon. I ran my hand over them, afraid they might crumble from age. The first letter wasn't signed. It said only one line that made my throat tighten: "For her safety, never tell." My hands trembled as I unfolded the next paper, a photograph, my husband, and a woman I'd never seen before. They were standing close, smiling. In her arms was a baby girl, no older than 1. My breath caught in my throat. The world tilted around me, the floor, the air, everything. I wanted to believe it wasn't him, that the picture lied, but there was no mistaking that smile. I dropped into the old chair beside the attic window, clutching the photos, the letters, the keyring, my entire marriage suddenly rewritten in my hands. Who was she? Who was that child? The room seemed to spin. I tried to breathe, to think, but every thought ran into another question. The letters, words, echoed in my mind. For her safety. Her. Who was her? The woman, the baby. I gathered the rest of the letters, but most were businesslike, old car orders, bank slips, some envelopes with no return address. Nothing that explained why a man would carry that photo like a ghost in his pocket. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling, fighting tears, wondering how much of our life had been a story he wrote for me, instead of the truth we shared together. And then, as I gathered the papers back into the box, I saw something drawn in the corner of that first letter. A tiny sketch of a key. The same brass key. And that's when I saw the same brass key drawn in the corner of the letter. I didn't sleep that night. The photo and letters sat on the table beside my tea, haunting me. By morning, I made up my mind. The number etched on the key, 47B, had to mean something. I remembered my husband's old shop. He'd worked there before opening his own garage. Maybe it was connected. I drove there, the roads still damp from early rain. The building stood half collapsed, the sign barely hanging from one rusted chain. I parked and stepped inside, the scent of rust and oil still clinging to the air like time hadn't moved. Everything was covered in dust. The calendar on the wall still read 1984. I wandered through the shadows, running my hand along the old workbench, the scattered tools, the faint shape of his handwriting on the clipboard dot in the corner. I saw an office door, metal, painted gray, with a small drawer beneath the desk. A tiny lock glinted in the light. I took a deep breath and slid the brass key from my pocket. It fit. I turned it slowly, afraid of what I might find. The lock clicked open. Inside the drawer was a single envelope, yellowed with age. My name was written on it in his handwriting. To my wife, if she ever finds this. I pressed the letter to my chest, my heart pounding so loud I could hear it echo in the room. I almost didn't open it, but something told me. The truth was about to cost me more than lies ever did. The paper was fragile, written in his steady hand. I could almost hear his voice as I read. He wrote that before we met, he had made a mistake. A young love that didn't last. A child born out of wedlock. He'd tried to do right by them, but the girl's mother had been sick, and before long, she passed away. He had taken care of them quietly, sending money, fixing things, making sure their daughter had what she needed. But when we married, he said, he was scared. Scared I'd walk away. Scared the town would talk. So he carried the guilt, the letters, and that photograph like penance, and the missing money. The nights I'd waited up, praying he wasn't straying. He wasn't out betraying me. He was keeping a promise to a child I never knew existed. Tears blurred the ink as I reached the end of the letter. He wrote about the day she turned 18, the day he stopped sending envelopes because she'd written to say she didn't need his help anymore. She'd written, "Thank you, but I think I'll find you someday." And then, one final line in his shaky handwriting, "You'll know her when she walks in." And the letter ended with one sentence that still haunts me. "You'll know her when she walks in." The morning after I read that letter, I sat on the porch, watching the sun stretch across the field. I didn't know what to feel. Grief, anger, shame, love, they all came rushing in waves. That's when a car pulled into the driveway. A young woman stepped out, holding a small notebook and wearing a nervous smile. "Ma'am," she said softly, "I'm researching local families for a project. I think we might be related." Her voice trembled just enough to break my heart. I looked at her, at those eyes. His eyes. She had his eyes. I felt my breath catch. My knees almost gave out, but I managed to nod, inviting her in, pretending I didn't already know. She sat at the table, complimented the house, asked about the town. I watched every movement, every expression. She told me she'd been adopted, that she'd grown up nearby, and recently discovered her birth records listed a man's name she didn't recognize. My husband's. She smiled sadly and said, "I think we're family somehow." I smiled back, hiding the storm behind my eyes. When she left, she handed me her number, scribbled neatly on the back of her notebook page. I held that piece of paper all night, unable to let it go, and I wondered, for the first time in my life, if love should always tell the truth. I ordered the DNA kit like I would order tea, hesitant, practical, as if it was one more chore to be done. I told myself I needed proof, not whispers. When the envelope arrived, its edges was soft from the mail, and I held it with hands that remembered how to steady a steering wheel and cradle a child. I put the swab in a paper bag, sat at the kitchen table with the old lamp on, and thought about how small decisions become the things we remember most. I thought about your grandfather at the bench, grease on his hands, the honest way he smiled when we found something fixed. I thought about all the times I had listened to the house breathe and called it comfort. The results came faster than I expected. A plain envelope, a line of print, and the world rearranged itself. Her name was on the report. Her name, and the percentage of shared blood that made the connection undeniable. I sat down hard on the chair, the paper trembling in my hands. For a moment I was 20 again, waiting for him to say a simple thing like, "I'm home." Instead, I had numbers and science telling me the truth the years had hidden. It was not betrayal in the way I had feared. It was not a life shattered by infidelity. It was a life complicated by love and duty. The key, that strange brass key, became a symbol that fit where nothing else had. Every late night at the garage, every envelope he tucked away, every night he came home smelling of oil instead of perfume, made sense in a new light. The ache in my chest loosened, replaced by a different ache, one that felt like grief, and then, oddly, relief. I read the letters again and saw the pattern. Small payments, a cheap pair of shoes bought in secret, a note about a school picture that made him proud. He had loved in a way that hid itself, sacrificing in silence so that no scandal would touch his family or the child. Anger still lived in me, a stubborn ember, but it was tempered now by the fact that he had not spent his nights on another woman's lap. He had spent them keeping a promise. Forgiveness does not arrive all at once. It moves in small increments, like the steam rising from a teacup. I found myself forgiving him for the secrecy and forgiving myself for not asking. I forgave him for carrying a burden he thought he had to carry alone. The house felt both emptier and fuller at once. Emptier because the man I married had hidden part of himself, fuller because the truth, however late, had finally arrived. As I folded the paper and set it beside his mug, a thin envelope fell out from between the pages of that last letter. It was not addressed to me. The handwriting was his familiar steady hand. It bore a name I had seen only once before. My fingers hovered over the flap, and my heart hammered. I thought about the weight of words we leave behind, and what they do when they find a reader. I knew that opening it would change more than one life. It would redraw the map of our family, and ask us to redraw our loyalties, our stories, and the small daily assumptions we had all been living beneath for decades, truly. And then, I found one last envelope addressed not to me, but to her. I sat with the decision like it was a heavy pot on the stove, something I had to tend carefully. Delivering that letter meant lifting a lid on a life I had sheltered. Keeping it meant letting another woman carry the weight alone. I called my son and told him nothing at first, then told him everything. He listened, the way children listen when their parents speak of the past. 1 part disbelief, 2 parts concern. He pressed me for honesty. She deserves to know, he said, blunt and gentle at once. Family dinners changed after that. The conversation grew thin around the edges. My hands trembled when I reached for the salt. Old jokes that used to land now sounded like echoes in a house that had rearranged itself while we slept. Your father worried aloud about scandal, about neighbors, and whispers. I told him I wasn't thinking of gossip. I was thinking of truth, and what it owed to a person born without a place to belong. There is a cost to choosing truth. People shift, people take sides. I could already feel the threads pulling at the quilt of our family. Small and stubborn tugs that made me want to stitch tighter, to keep it all together by any means. My daughter, Law, practical and kind, suggested we meet in public to keep things calm. My granddaughter, wise beyond her years, sent me a text that read only, "Be brave." Grandma, I clung to that 2-word prayer like a handrail. I imagined the life I might be offering the young woman if I brought her into our kitchen, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of a radio playing a station my husband loved. I imagined awkward silences, questions asked and unanswered, the slow knitting of 2 lives together. I also imagined the damage of silence, a life lived with a missing piece, a child wondering why the piece never fit. The night before I was to meet her again, I found an anonymous note slipped under my door. It was a plain scrap of paper with jagged edges and a single sentence. Don't stir up the past. No signature, no name, just a warning that landed like a stone in the middle of my quiet pond. For a moment I considered folding the letter into my pocket and walking away from everything. Fear is a clever muscle. It flexes at the thought of change. But the thought of that child, of any child growing up without the knowledge that someone had cared enough to hide money for shoes and school books, would not let me rest. I wrapped the note in a drawer and slept with the letter to her against my chest. Feeling both ashamed and determined, I rose dressed and told myself that honesty, however costly, was the best gift I could give that woman. The anonymous note changed the air in the town. I could feel it when I walked to the post office, when neighbors nodded but didn't stop. Someone knew. Maybe the old men at the diner who remembered my husband's younger days. Maybe someone who had been carrying this secret too. It made me feel small and larger at once. Small, because a scrap of paper could unsettle me. Larger because the truth had grown teeth and would not be ignored. That night I found myself pacing by the window. The house felt watched. Shadows gathered in familiar corners as if they had something to say. I thought of the woman in the photograph and the child who had grown up without a home that carried their name. My resolve hardened. The town might murmur, but I would not let fear decide whether someone learned the truth of her father. I called the young woman and asked if we could meet. Her voice was steady, touched with curiosity and a caution I understood well. She agreed to coffee. We sat across from each other in the little cafe on Main, the one with checked tablecloths and pie behind the glass. I told her some things then, and left other things undone, saving them like small offering stones for a later crossing. After our talk, a neighbor stopped to warn me, eyes darting like a bird. "You don't know what those old stories will wake up," she said. I nodded. I had already felt the rumble, but it was not enough to frighten me into silence. If someone else knew, if the town had murmured and someone had chosen to warn me, it meant the truth already had steps outside the door. Hiding it would not save anyone. So I gathered the letter, the key, and a small photograph I'd kept under the Bible and drove straight to her house. My hands were steady now, but my heart sprinted like a child. The sky was low and blue, an ordinary day, pretending nothing had changed. I kept the letter folded in my palm, feeling the paper's edges like a map of decisions. I told myself that light had a way of making things clearer, even if the clarity hurt. I parked a street away, walked up the path, and rehearsed a greeting in my head. The moment I raised my hand to knock, wind shifted. Somewhere an old dog barked, and the world seemed to hold its breath. I had brought the truth to her doorstep, and there was no turning back, and waited with trembling hope. So I took the letter, the key, and the truth, and drove straight to her house. I parked my car a few houses down and sat with the engine idling. Rain had started again, soft at first, and then steady, as if the sky were trying to wash away what I was about to do. I placed the folded letter on the passenger seat and rested my forehead against the cool steering wheel. I had rehearsed words for days, but rehearsals do not hold up to the tremor of a real moment. I found myself speaking aloud to him, the man who had carried keys for decades and kept some of them hidden. "You old fool," I said into the rain, the words half anger and half a plea. "What were you afraid of?" The windshield fogged with my breath. I told him I had read the letters, that I knew about the child, that I had found the key. I asked him, aloud, why he had tried to spare me by sparing her. There is a kind of confession that feels like storming a fortress, and a kind that feels like laying down flowers on a grave. Mine felt like both. I told him I was angry. I told him I was proud. I told him I forgave him, though I did not know yet what forgiveness would cost me. The rain kept beating in a regular rhythm, matching the beating in my chest. I prayed, as I had not prayed in years, simple words, not eloquent, asking for courage and for the right way to tell. The porch light of the house I sat near blinked on, then off, then on again. It felt like an answer, or like a signal that someone else was awake to the same ache. I sat there in the dark and let my knees fold into my chest. For the first time, since he'd died, I felt both utterly alone and deeply connected to a life that stretched beyond my kitchen table. Memories came in a flood, him teaching me to change the oil, how he'd whistle when he was happy, the time he stayed up all night to make sure our daughter's fever broke. I remembered the way he had once told me, in a quiet voice, that men sometimes carry their pasts in secret to protect the people they love. Back then, I had accepted it as a sad truth of life. Now, with the letters in my pocket, it felt like a test I had to pass. I thought of all the small choices that make a life: what to say, what to hold back, when to step in. The rain made a steady percussion, and with each drop I felt a little lighter and a little more afraid. My heart was a pendulum swinging between anger and an odd, aching tenderness. There are moments when you hold two truths at once, that someone you love hurt you, and that someone you love tried to do right in the only way they thought possible. Sitting there, I felt both truths like twin hands on my shoulders. I breathed and set my resolve. The porch light across the street flicked on again, bright this time, and I took that as permission to move forward. I smoothed my skirt with shaky fingers, tucked the letter and the brass key into my coat pocket, and climbed out of the car. The rain hit my face like a benediction. I walked up the path, each step measured, and raised my hand to knock. My knuckles were wet. I whispered, "Show me what to do," and just then, the porch light flicked on. Steadfast, I knocked and waited. The door opened a crack, and I saw her face framed by dim light, young Worry, and with that same quiet strength I remembered in his jawline. For a moment, neither of us spoke. We stood like strangers who might be family. I handed her the envelope first, then the key, then the photograph. My voice trembled as I said the words I had practiced and never wanted to say. "Your father wanted me to find you if I ever did." She took the letter with hands that were not sure if they were shaking or steady. She read it quietly, lips moving with the letters as if to anchor them. When she reached the line that told of quiet money for school books, her eyes drifted up to mine and filled. I told her about nights he worked without rest, how he fixed things not to earn applause, but because he thought it kept someone safe. There were questions she asked that I couldn't answer: where exactly he had been most nights, the details of the years before I met him. I answered with what I knew and with what I didn't. Honesty felt like a two-edged blade. It freed and it cut. She listened. Then she told me about the woman in the photograph, her mother, how she had loved and lost and been brave in ways that town never noticed. That was the first time we cried together. We sat on the back steps with the rain slowing, talking like people who had been carrying pieces of the same broken map. She asked if I would teach her to make the pie he liked, if I would let her come to Sunday dinner. I said yes. She laughed a bit, and then leaned her head on my shoulder as if it was the most natural place in the world. We began to stitch our lives together with small things. I told her about the garage and the car he'd been fixing for years. When she left that afternoon, she took the key with her in a small, worn purse. We hugged long, and I felt the house breathe out. The decision to tell had been the hardest thing I had done in years, but it also felt like the truest. The truth, once told kindly, had the power to heal quiet wounds. We promised to take them slowly, to let new family grow at its honest pace. There was a final door waiting, one last keyhole he had left for us to find. A week later, she called me. Her voice carried a tremor. I recognized the sound of someone standing on the edge of understanding. "There's something you should see," she said. We drove together that afternoon to the old garage at the edge of town. The sky was clear, the air crisp, the kind that carries both endings and beginnings. The building hadn't changed. The peeling paint, the sagging sign, the same gravel crunch under our shoes. Only now it didn't feel haunted. It felt expectant. She walked ahead of me, the brass key swinging lightly from her hand. "There's a small door in the back," she said. "I think it's where he used to keep his personal projects." The lock was stiff. She knelt, slid the key in, and turned it. The click echoed through the empty garage like a heartbeat returning after silence. We pulled the door open, the hinges groaning in protest. Dust motes spun in a beam of sunlight. Inside was a single Koran old Chevy, perfectly preserved under a sheet of canvas. The smell of oil and polish hit me first, familiar and piercing. We lifted the cover together. The car gleamed. Seafoam green, his favorite color. The chrome was bright, the seats spotless. A ribbon was tied around the steering wheel, and a small note was taped to the dash. It read, "Now you know why I worked late." My breath caught. She covered her mouth, eyes glistening. "He built it for me," she whispered. "All those years, he was finishing this." I nodded, unable to speak. My hands traced the smooth metal, remembering his rough and patient, shaping something out of scrap and time. We sat in the car together, neither of us talking, just breathing in what he'd left behind, a final message made of effort, forgiveness, and love. In the glove compartment, she found another envelope. Inside was a photograph of her mother holding her as a baby, and beneath it, a smaller picture of me, our wedding day. The note underneath read, "Family isn't about who you hide the truth from, it's about who you finally share it with." She looked at me then, tears sliding down her cheeks. I reached out, resting my hand over hers. "He wanted you to know him," I said softly. "And maybe he wanted me to remember him, honestly." We sat there until the sunlight shifted and the day turned gold. The air was thick with memory, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or sorrow. I felt release. Forgiveness isn't a grand gesture, it's a quiet one. It's the exhale, after years of holding your breath. As we stepped out of the garage, the key felt lighter in my hand, like it had finally done its job. And in that moment, I realized forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about seeing clearly. After that day, everything began to settle into a new kind of peace. She started coming over on Sundays, helping in the kitchen, laughing with the family. The first few weeks were careful, like stepping on a frozen pond and hoping the ice holds, but soon, it did. My son watched her with quiet curiosity at first, then, with acceptance. My granddaughter took to her immediately, pulling her into games and stories as if she'd always been there. I found myself setting 2 mugs on the table again, one for me, one for her. She liked her tea strong, no sugar, just like her father. We shared stories, mine about the man I'd married, hers about the man she'd never known but always felt close to. It was as if we were stitching 2 halves of the same quilt, the pattern becoming clearer with every visit. One evening, she brought the Chevy around. It ran smooth as honey, the engine purring softly. "He would have been proud," I told her. "You finished what he started." She smiled, eyes bright. "No, we did. Life doesn't erase what hurts, but it finds ways to grow around it." Slowly, the wound became a scar, still visible, but no longer painful to touch. One afternoon, I hung the little brass key by the kitchen window, tied to a thin white ribbon. It catches the sunlight every morning, a flicker of gold that dances across the counter. It reminds me that truth, even when buried, has a way of shining through. Sometimes, I still wake early and expect to hear his boots by the door, but instead of sadness, I feel gratitude. Gratitude that he left behind something more meaningful than explanations. He left a chance for two lives to meet and heal. But some nights, when the wind rattles the glass, I still hear his voice say, "Thank you, my dear." Life hides truth, the way old houses hide keys in corners we forget to look at, behind memories we polish too much to see what's missing. If there's one thing I've learned through all this, it's that love doesn't always show itself the way we expect. Sometimes it hides behind mistakes, behind silence, behind fear. But when you finally find the courage to turn the key, face what's been locked away, you find not shame, but understanding. We live in a world that tells us to move on quickly, to forgive and forget. But forgiveness isn't forgetting. Forgiveness is seeing someone clearly, flaws and all, and deciding that love is still the larger truth. Your grandfather wasn't perfect. He was a man who tried to fix things with his hands when his heart didn't know how. He carried secrets, but not out of malice, of the belief that silence could protect the people he loved. And maybe, for a while, it did. But in the end, truth was the only thing that set us all free. I want you to remember this, my dear. When you face something that scares you, something that's been locked away too long, don't turn away. Take a breath, hold your courage steady, and turn the key, because sometimes the key you fear to turn is the one that sets you free. After I shared this story, letters started arriving, emails, handwritten notes. People told me about the fathers they forgave, the siblings they found, the mothers they finally called after years of silence. One woman said she'd found her birth family because of something I said about the courage to look backward. It reminded me that we're all connected by invisible keys, little pieces of truth, waiting to unlock something inside us. I read your comments every evening. Some make me cry, some make me laugh, and some remind me that telling our stories, even the painful ones, is what keeps the world gentle. So, to those of you listening tonight, thank you for listening, for remembering, for forgiving. You've turned your own keys in quiet ways I'll never know, and I'm proud of you for it. And maybe tonight, someone else out there is holding their own mysterious key. These days, she comes by every Thursday. We bake bread together, the house filling with that warm smell that makes time slow down. She's learning to garden, just like I did when I was young, and every spring she plants a row of marigolds in his memory. The Chevy sits out back, polished to a shine. Sometimes she drives it around the block, wind in her hair, eyes bright with that same calm confidence her father had behind the wheel. Life found its rhythm again, different, softer, but no less full. And every morning, when the sunlight hits that little brass key by the window, I whisper a thank you to the man who taught me that love, even when flawed, can build something that lasts. And next week, I'll tell you about the letter I found, tucked in his old Bible. Thank you, my dear ones, for spending your evening with me here on Grandma Cozy Stories. Every night, we share tales of family, truth, and the quiet bravery of love. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and stay close. We have new stories every single day about the moments that make us human, and the keys that open more than doors. Stay cozy, stay kind, and I'll see you tomorrow. Stories that heal. New episodes daily. Subscribe for tomorrow's tale, only on Grandma Cozy Stories.